Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to episode number 61 of the Nautel Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. This is me cheating and looking to the left because I can't remember those numbers. Uh, we're session number 2 in what's turning out to be IT month. Actually, it was kind of forecast to be IT month. I get to blame one of our presenters for that, and we'll give credit where credit is due when we get down there. But as always, I try to find a bunch of people smarter than me, which is usually not that hard to do. And this week we've got the same cast of characters as last week, and I hope we'll have them again next week. Starting, leading the pack, you'll notice the list isn't in alphabetical order at all. It's in whatever order that Ed thought was the most handsome or best dressed. I'm not sure exactly which it was. It can't be because I'm at the top. But we've got the Assistant General Manager for WGCU Public Media, Kevin Trueblood's with us again. Kevin, welcome, and thanks for being here again.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And by the way, I think you're getting really good at that intro. That I'm getting some like old school radio DJ vibes when you do that introduction.
Just kind of rolls off the tongue after 50 or 60. If you scroll back, and I did this not long ago, and go through the archives, the first episode was a whole lot rougher, shall we say. That's putting it very politely.
Well,
Also,
you've got it down well. It sounds good.
thank you much. Also, we've got Aaron Reed, the IT and Engineering Director for Rhode Island Public Radio, the People's Radio. And Aaron, welcome back, and glad to have you again.
It's the public's radio, but yes, glad to be here. Thank you.
I almost got it right. Hey, considering I don't have it in front of me and just doing it by memory and don't work for y'all, that I was pretty impressed. I got in the right ballpark. And last but certainly not least, and as I said, bottom of the list for the dress code or whatever metric Ed used when he selected this stuff. Now that I look at it, it may have just been no, it wasn't even alphabetical order by companies we work for. But broadcast integration specialist for Wisconsin Public Radio, the handsome and talented Mr. Alex Hartman. Alex, welcome back again.
Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Full of sunshine and buttercups, man, as always. William mentions that another 60 times and I'll sound like a pro, but I highly doubt that. There's a reason they typically don't put me, well, what I tell people one day, I've got a face for radio and a voice for newsprint. And we all know where newsprint's going. So we are talking IT this week. Kind of partitioning and general security is the rough topic that we're going to try and sort of keep track of. Mandatory housekeeping stuff before we get rolling. If you're new to our webinars, and I'm seeing a lot of familiar names in here, but one or two that aren't so much, we do encourage folks to be interactive, and you've heard me reference one or two already. You got a little question box in your control panel. You can type in your question, hit the send button. It'll pop up on my screen, and I will try to throw it in there where it fits. We accept sarcasm, snark, criticism, comments, questions, and concerns. So by all means, feel free to make yourself part of the conversation. If you've got a microphone and you're not shy, hit the little hand wavy icon shown on the screen, and more than happy to unmute you and make you part of the chat just live in real time. There's no dump button. Be nice. This webinar will be archived. If you're an SBE member and certified, by all means, jot this down in your spreadsheet, notepad, whatever you keep track of that stuff with. It does qualify for half of a SBE recertification credit under category I of the research schedule. So keep, I suppose I should start keeping track of that stuff myself. Kevin, there's a question for you. My recertification's up in 2023. If I don't feel like recertifying and just decide to write the CSRE exam, does that qualify? I don't even have to bother? I may have found a way out of this whole recertification thing. I'll just keep upping the certification every 5 years.
You have to restate that. I didn't quite catch that question.
See, this is what happens when you ask the manager something. He's not listening. That's
no, I was listening, but I was like, wait, is that being serious? Like, am I hearing this right?
No, so I've got a CBRE right now. It's up for recertification January 23. So rather than keeping the little schedule, I figured that come November, December, I'll find out who's doing testing and just go take my CSRE exam and just upgrade my certification instead of renewing it.
Yep, that would make sense.
There you go. All right,
Jeff, I can give you one bit of advice on that. Do it sooner than November or December. There's about
was
there's about a 6 to 8 month backlog right now, I think.
yeehaw. I was
Yeah.
arbitrarily picking a time, but that's a good point to know. I did do a logistics session for the SPE last month, and everything is backed up, whether you're ordering parts, ordering transmitters, or writing your certification. So that's a really good point. Thanks, Aaron. Tim mentions he was thinking of doing the same thing in the comments. Mr. Barry, welcome aboard. And let's see. So ideas for things to cover. Basically, I left the same one up as last week. I don't believe I changed anything. We'll hit a lot of the same topics just from different angles as we go through the day. Last week, Alex provided most of the content. This week, I think Aaron provided it. So, Kevin, ball's in your court for next week. But where this all came
to
from.
the PowerPoint.
So you did, yeah, and that's my fault. Last week I said this week was going to be VPNs, and I said it repeatedly on mic and on camera. So I can't say that I, was misrepresented. But yeah, I got schedule screwed up. Next week is where we specifically focus on VPNs. This week we want to lean on partitioning a little. And we talked about it a bit last week, the concept that, as an example, the DJs don't necessarily need to be doing show prep on a computer that can access finances records. And I mean, Aaron and Kevin, I'll let you duke it out who goes first, but you guys have both work at upper levels of big public, well, Alex too, but how do you decide who gets what?
It's easier than ever these days because most all of it is cloud-based. So you really don't have to partition much in that regard because it's just secure websites. I mean, most of our stuff has either moved to Workday or it's moved to cloud-based systems. So that's kind of naturally baked in.
Mm-hmm. Aaron,
Yeah,
what about on your end?
Yeah, we've mostly gone down that route as well. A huge majority of what we do now is cloud-based. So we don't generally partition things too much. The biggest thing that we probably do divide out is what you can access when you're on Wi-Fi versus what you can access when you're on wired. Now, admittedly, that kind of all became moot when COVID hit because we moved to an almost entirely work from home model for most of our company. But when we were in the office, you had to be connected to the wired connections in order to access the domain controller and a lot of the firewall, the VPN appliance, all that stuff. Pretty much everything else, though, we never got too far down the road into, finances on this side and newsroom is on this side, that sort of thing. I should say the only other thing is that the automation system does kind of live off in its own little world, and that's largely almost a entirely physically separate network from everything else we do. I mean, we probably could have just used VLANs to partition it all, but in this particular case, it was almost easier just to have it run on separate switches and separate everything. So also we use a managed service provider for a lot of our IT help, and that made it easier to keep them and their little fingers off of our automation system, which neither they nor us wanted.
Well, and that was one of the things that you had mentioned last week that, and I've said this before to other folks, if you're contracting stuff out, I mean, the contract company will understand your network, they'll understand your operating system, they'll understand traffic, maybe they'll understand billing. They will not understand automation or telemetry or STLs or Ubiquity nano beams or whatever. Jeff Wilson in the comments is saying the best way to handle IT security is to keep sales away from everything. And the funny thing, Greg, our IT manager, is listening in. I'm sure he was here the other day, and he kind of reached out after, and he goes, I just have to wonder, he goes, because every time I go to make a change, the first guy to call me and complain is you, but here you are talking about all the things I'm trying to do and saying, and it's like, look, I'm a hypocrite. I'll admit it here. I'll do it in public and online. I understand the need, but I'll be the first to whine if it makes things even a tiny little bit more difficult. And sometimes the education, and we talked about that before, the education is probably one of the bigger parts of security, correct? Alex, you work with one of the larger public broadcasters, I guess, in my little sphere of influence. And how do you handle the education of the end users?
So we, as engineers, are good at over-explaining. And so we do a lot of that. So it's a lot of, watch for the eyes to glaze over and give them reasons why we're doing these things and why their life has to be a little bit more difficult. It's one of those things, until it happens to you, you don't believe it. And Wisconsin Public Radio is one of those places where it did happen to us, and now they believe it. So when they had to revoke access to everybody and go into a zero trust model, and you only get access to the systems you need to get access to do your job, instead of, just let you roam free, out and graze in the pasture. No, we're going to keep you over here because you only need access to News Boss, the audition stuff to do your newscast. We're not going to let you go and, you just happen to be able to access like Pathfinder from my Axia network. No, you're not allowed there. So it goes into a need to know basis in our world, just because of the size and scope.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that point,
and there are always going to be some, I guess, challenges, headbutts, whatever, where somebody who's always accessed something that, all of a sudden they can't get to it if you switch to zero trust. And, so at that point, you just use a little understanding, reach out and say, hey, I need this because, and, there'll be times, and there have been one or two times where Greg has come back to me and very gently said, but do you really? And it's like, well, probably not really. And we had this conversation, Kevin, we were talking about when in the preamble in a different scenario, but it's the we've always done it this way scenario mindset can be a little hard to overcome. So what do you do with that?
Well, to me, I always look at it as what are they actually trying to get done? Because people fall back into habits. That's probably the biggest thing I have to overcome is, they fall back onto what they know and what they're experienced with. And so, if they're trying something new, they can't necessarily guarantee it. So they're not as likely to try it. So to me, I always try and figure out what are we actually trying to accomplish. For example, you talk about giving people access. The challenge we have now is we're starting to incorporate more journalism students into our facility, and that are within the university. And they're like, well, the students will be bringing their own laptops into the building and they need access to our network. And I'm like, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. Well, how are they going to get to our files? They're not. Right. And they can use our Wi-Fi to get on our network. And then we happen to have like Microsoft OneDrive. You can send stuff, that's all set up by the university. You can store stuff on OneDrive. You can retrieve stuff from OneDrive. They don't have to touch any of our resources. So there's usually a happy medium somewhere in there to be able to accomplish what they're after in the most secure form without having to insult people's intelligence.
Right. I know sometimes I think my intelligence should be insulted, but that's that's self-inflicted. That brings me back, and that you made a good point. Like at Nautel as an example, and say I know I've been one of the probably bigger sources of heartburn and gray hair in this regard. Is that if I want to access a work email, I use this cell phone, not this cell phone. If coincidentally the one that I showed last is my personal one and it's all shiny and new. But anyway, I can access email from my company laptop, but not from my personal one, because one of the things with a lot of the email exploits is that we've limited access, for example, to Microsoft 365 via web. And and like I said, again, a situation where I understand the the need for it, but I did whine, I'll confess. Now, Aaron, you were talking about the difference between like Wi-Fi and wired, and that's a good point. I mean, we at one point, and we're veering way more to the model you're discussing. At one point, we had like a guest Wi-Fi and an employee Wi-Fi at the plant, and we've kind of gotten away from that. But yeah, how do you differentiate, and why? Why would be the bigger one?
Yeah, we still have the guest Wi-Fi. I mean, again, it's been almost completely moot for almost 2 years now. But yeah, as we for what it's worth, I'll give a quick plug to anyone who missed last week's webinar. Alex gave a great breakdown about the problems with Wi-Fi and the inherent security issues. So, after you're done here, go check that out because it's worth listening to. And it's actually given me some food for thought too, because we actually intentionally moved to a primarily Wi-Fi model in the office, largely because our wired network was so screwed up and we couldn't afford to bring someone in and try and re-pull all of it because it's a historic building and it's obscenely expensive trying to pull cable everywhere. It's not like a regular building, believe me. It's kind of weird. We're actually trying to move out. So we went to an all Wi-Fi model, but at least we took some basic security precautions in that you can't get at the core security aspects of the network while you're on Wi-Fi. You have to be connected to the wired at least. Now, granted, also all that stuff is password protected, so it's not like anyone who's on the wired one can just log into the firewall or log into the domain controller and just wreak havoc. That's the only people who really know how to do that stuff. Actually, I don't even bother with it. It's mostly the MSP guys that do it. But that's what we did set up the guest Wi-Fi for a little bit of extra protection. But as Kevin noted earlier in this webcast, I mean, we've done the same thing. We're mostly cloud now. We're a Google Workspace shop. All of our email, almost all of our documentation, unless something absolutely needs a feature that Word or Excel uses, we've moved almost completely into Google Docs and Google Sheets and Google, whatever they call the PowerPoint version of it. I always forget.
Slide, I think, or something.
Slides. Yeah, there you go. Google Slides. And we use that for so much. And we use Adobe Audition. Creative Cloud is our primary audio editing tool. We have a few others that people, some folks use Audacity, some folks use OSIN Audio, a few others, but they mostly use Audition, and they just share their files back and forth on Google Drive. And yes, a lot of people discovered that they needed to upgrade their home Wi-Fi speeds once they started going down that road. And I have a cobbled together but perfectly functional Google Drive file system put together that allows people to copy stuff into a specific Google Drive folder, and that gets imported into the Enco automation. And if you export something, it shows up in a particular folder. And I mean, there's arguments to be said that could be more secure, but it's not terrible. I mean, I can just control it all through access within Google itself, which actually gives you a fair amount of granularity. Like I'll give you a great, for instance, we discovered early in the pandemic that apparently for legal reasons, and I don't know if this is true in every state, but it was true in ours, when it comes to labor law, you can't have emails that are implying that someone is a full-time employee when they're not. Well, that's a real issue for us because we have graduate assistants who are paid but are working under specific rules of being a graduate assistant, and we have a ton of interns. So we started having to put like -intern at the end of everyone's username so that it showed up that way in their email address, which seemed weird, but that's what our lawyer told us to do, so we did it. You might want to check into that for your own stuff.
So that's a really good point. And Kurt makes another one. Curtis in the comments, the way we've also done it is a problem for anywhere where the new guy comes in and sees where changes could be made, and you tend to get some pushback sometimes. I may or may not be the old guy doing the pushing back on occasion. So, I don't disagree with with the fact that I know that it happens and I know that I'm doing it. But yeah, it's a good point. Somebody else, Shane Tobin, is here, and Shane has got infinite realms of experience. That's terribly worded, but Shane made some comments, a good comment about bring your own device. And Shane, I've unmuted you, and I see you've unmuted yourself. Talk to that a little bit if you would, because
Yeah,
you get a big old comment here, and rather than me read it, how about you discuss it?
absolutely. Yeah. Hey guys. So yeah, bring your own device. I mean, it's a huge discussion, topic of discussion at many facilities, especially larger kind of corporate environments. I mean, it's got its advantages and drawbacks. The advantage, of course, is that you have everything on a single device. The drawback is you have everything on a single device. But it can be deployed in a secure manner if you insist that those devices still have some amount of central management. For instance, I mean, I use the same phone for my personal phone for both work and personal, but I had to install a management application on there that partitioned off the work stuff and allowed that to be managed, as well as enforcing certain security requirements, like making sure it locks with a PIN code and various other things. So, I mean, it can be done carefully, and I guess you just have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of that approach.
Yeah. Now, I'm one of the bigger proponents, and it's funny because again, I'm the in-house Luddite in a lot of ways, but when it comes to cloud-based stuff, and quantifying that, I still prefer to have some backup. Like I told somebody the other day, Alexa went down last week, and I had to actually learn how to operate those toggle devices on the walls to make the room brighter or darker. It was maddening. But the advantage of cloud-based, like I'm doing this on the company laptop right now, if this thing blows up in the middle of this thing, other than the Wi-Fi limitation that we've instilled for security, I can grab any laptop in the house and pretty much be back up and running, from a work perspective in no time flat, at least temporarily. So yeah, that's a good point. Joseph asks a question here, and Aaron, I'll get you to address that. Is Google Docs that secure? Is it secure enough to be trusted? Obviously, you feel it must be.
It's as secure as you want it to be.
Fair enough.
I mean, there are a lot of ways to run Google Docs horrendously insecurely. Let's put it that way. You can literally set it up so that it's nothing more than a weak password, and that's it. You're in. I don't recommend that, obviously. In fact, at our shop, we went to they call it two-step verification. I think 2SV, but it's the same. It's synonymous with 2FA, two-factor authentication. We went with two-factor authentication a while ago. In fact, I think we didn't set it up when we first launched, but we got it in place within a few months later. And then about a year ago, I want to say, there was that story. Well, let me back up. Most people who did it through text messages, which is a very common way of doing it. And then there was that story that came out about how easy it is to basically buy control over someone else's phone line for texting purposes. And I forget how I posted it somewhere. I'd have to go look it up. If I can, I'll post it in the comments. So as soon as I read that, and then I read a little bit more, and I realized, oh, okay, text messages are not secure at all anymore. This is a sick joke. We're a news organization. We're a target, no matter how small we may think we are. So I went through with everybody on staff. We turned off text messages as a factor of authentication, and now we use the Authenticator app that Google provides on your phone, which is, again, nothing's really totally secure, but that's not bad. That's a pretty good way of doing it. And so that's how we manage our security that way. Once you're in Google, you can also assign your users, I think they're called work groups within the lexicon of Google Workspace. But like, I have employees, I have interns, I have guests, I have non-intern employees, stuff like that. So that way I can fairly easily assign someone to a specific group that doesn't necessarily have access to everything within
Right.
Google, or it only has access to certain parts of Google Drive, for example. And it also makes it easier to revoke their access when and if they leave as well.
Yeah, well, and I'll give you an example here where we will, depending on COVID status, switch between in-person and remote schooling almost literally on a day's notice. I
Oh, wow.
mean, you know, everything is done with Google Classroom, which is another Google Doc type format. And yeah, I mean, they can set up teachers, parents, and student accounts, and depending, they can, everything that, like, the school has one Google primary Google account, and all of the classrooms are subdivided into parent, teacher, and student. And you know, I can see exactly what my boys' class is doing within the realm of what they want parents to see, and but not what any other class is doing. So yeah, it's fairly easy to partition. And the cool thing is we can get a notice in the morning. Here's the thing that nobody has yet thought of, and it's coming. You heard it here first. But the day is coming when there will be no more snow days. And for those of us that live in this hemisphere, and Aaron, you're one, Kevin grew up here,
Kevin's
Alex is up
exempt.
here. He's a Florida man now, but I mean, he wasn't always.
Well, I suppose you guys almost did have a snow day the other day, didn't you?
But so those days are rapidly drawing to a close, because I mean, there is no reason right now why they couldn't say, okay, don't bother coming to school today. The buses aren't running. By the way, turn your Chromebooks on and go to pay, or go to whatever folder, and class is in session, carry on.
So we actually have that here with my kids as well. They've got Chromebooks, and if it's a school's in session in-person day, you open that Chromebook, it says go to school. So they actually do shut down the remote side of that to do in-person learning, because they also have a device at school, so the account just transfers to the in-school device. And if they deem it a snow day, so to speak, or work or school from home day, they have a switch somewhere in their administrative panel that switches it to the device that's remote and turns that system on. So that's getting to the point where schools are getting very, very, very advanced at that, being able to pivot on a dime of where that user is coming from.
Yeah. Oh, Aaron, I see where you posted in the chat the link for the Vice.com article on the hacker getting the text. Ed, Aaron had posted it to organizers and panelists, so if you could make it public to everybody, that would be really cool.
How do I do
That's
that?
okay. It's a learning curve thing.
Oh, I see.
There you go. And William mentions that they're doing the same thing in Virginia, and he actually had to shovel the driveway himself instead of having the boy do it. So yeah, the you know, virtual school is just not what it used to be. John wants to know how you skip school when it's a good fishing day, and yeah, that could be a challenge.
Especially if you
But
buy your kids a cell phone, they know where they are.
right. And you know, there are a lot of things that you can do in that kind of scenario. So the power you get from that is pretty huge. And I think that you know, again, like I said, I'm the in-house Luddite, but even I see the benefit of this stuff. So it definitely is something that that is coming one way or the other. And here we are, we're half an hour in, and I haven't even clicked off the preamble. So we did have a few heads up questions. And from a security perspective, and Alex, you and I had talked about this a little bit in the preamble, but one of the questions was the best software protection to load onto the PCs. And that is really subjective based on situation. I know my work computer has got Sophos on it. My home computers, I rely on Windows Defender primarily, which has improved head and shoulders above what it was years ago. So what are your thoughts on that?
And it really depends on situation and enterprise. You know, Aaron may have a different answer because he technically works for a private business, whereas Kevin and I both work for a university setting where the enterprise dictates to us what we can and can't do. For instance, we're required to have Cisco AMP on our stuff, like Nautel has the Sophos stuff. But Aaron may be just relying on Windows Defender or whatever is built into the Mac ecosystem for his Mac users, just because it does work.
We lost your audio, Alex.
Lost my audio.
Oh,
There
now
you
you're
go.
back.
There we are. Anyway, so there may be an MSP level thing that they have put on his border that is doing some intrusion prevention and zero-day exploit monitoring for him on his network, but at the end user device, he probably isn't doing anything special. Again, it comes down to situational based. I use Windows Defender on my personal devices because it covers the vast majority of my need. Whereas because of the enterprise, and to use Wayne Pacina's onion metaphor for work, we have an Active Directory LDAP system. So depending on how far into the core of the onion you want to go, we'll go with, here's the 2 FA keys that I have to get in. This is the front door. This gets me into my office. And then if I need to get into the core, I have to use these 3 plus this. So, it goes into the multi-factor authentication stuff. And depending, if I have to get into the AD to add a new user, I need 4 different forms of identification to even get into it. So there's a lot of layers of security depending on how deep you go.
Now, that Keith makes the comment asking, and while you're talking about the USB multi-factor authentication token, he's talking about what do you think of the YubiKey 5 NFC 2-factor authentication USB device? Recently purchased one and have been experimenting with it. What about a hardware device over send me a text or use my authenticator app?
Two minds of it. So I'm one of the guys just like you. I double fist my cell phones. Plus I have the keys. Plus I have various other things. So the combination thereof, the keys have the benefit of they're dumb devices, right? You lose these, you can call your administrator and he can revoke the token off of your system. We use Fortinet. Currently, we're moving to Palo Alto at the university level, so these will become moot very soon. But these 2 devices here are controlled by the administrator, so if this gets lost at the park when I'm out playing with the kids, I just call them up and say, hey, send me new keys. They revoke the access to this. Boom, everything's gone. Because I need these in combination with this to get to the core. So without, if I'm missing one of these, just this device.
And there he goes again.
Functionally, that's the way to do it.
So, Alex, it's funny, you'll be talking and then somebody mentions that somebody's hacked you and is trying to shut you up from telling us how to stop hackers. So, your audio will drop out for about 5 seconds and then you're back. On a security note too, one of the top question here, opinion on copying radio MP3 from email to file server versus playing via console to record to automation. And I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is, first off, copying anything from email to the file server without running it through some pretty intense verification first is frightening, to say the least. So Kevin, what rules do you guys have in place when it comes to dumping stuff into your automation system from the outside world?
I mean, it's pretty much just save it. You can save stuff to your local machine. We don't have a ton of restrictions just because, our emails go through, it's managed pretty well, and they've got a lot of antivirus, basically if anything makes it through, chances are it's pretty clean. Like, you can probably trust that it's going to be fine. So we don't have a ton of restrictions when it comes to those kinds of things.
Mark had mentioned earlier, and this just seemed like a good place to talk to it, but now I'll have to scroll up. Have enacted a policy regarding external media such as thumb drives, where we have a dedicated machine that will virus check before allowing them to import and export. And same deal. I mean, would you plug a thumb drive into an automation computer?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I've gone so far on my automation machines to go into the BIOS and shut off the USBs that are not a keyboard or mouse. Those are just not even turned on anymore. The sacrificial machine is great. Again, like I said, for a vast majority of the smaller non-enterprise level people who don't have an MSP doing their border stuff. But Windows 10 and 11 both have Windows Defender, which have an active system scanning. So as soon as you plug this in and try and copy a file and it's got something on it, it's going to let you know.
Right.
And by the way, one key thing, for as much as everybody belly aches about Windows updates, keep it updated. I mean, that is a requirement. If you're going to run Windows Defender, it has to be routinely updated.
Yep.
Right. And I'll throw a caveat into that. So the and this is, I guess, the sacrificial machine. I like the idea. I'm a proponent of scanning any external media before you plug it into a critical system. But again, not only do you have to be constantly updating the definitions on the sacrificial machine, it really shouldn't be connected to your in-house physical network either, because at that point you run the risk of, if the sacrificial machine gets compromised with, well, and let's pick malware, or ransomware, an even better example. It doesn't take much before you've taken the whole thing down.
The easy button there and the compromised of known risk, right? Let's go back to Kirk's example from last week where he puts a router between his Livewire network and the public network just so he can get like time, NTP data. Same thing can happen here. You can isolate that machine using a little basic router so it can get to the internet and update itself, but it's isolated from the rest of your world.
Right.
That is the easy button, quote unquote, because it's not going to try and traverse a WAN, and nor will it. The router will stop it dead in its tracks. So that is one way around that scenario. But again, you have to know what you're doing. And there is, as everybody says, security is only as good as how you hook it up. And if you have physical access, you have no security at all.
Right.
So if it can be bypassed at the moment's notice because there's a problem, and they're running late and they've got 10 minutes to get on air with that file, well, guys are going to do what they're going to do, right? Oh, look, Wi-Fi, turn it on. So pay close attention to that portion of it just as much.
Yeah. I'm going to defer the question on selecting HTML port for GUI, and I'll explain why right now really quick. We're about 2 days away. Well, later this week, I'm hoping you'll see the few beta testers will see the beta 2, the full release AUI NonFlash coming out. And hopefully, so I'm hearing could be the end of this month. I'm saying probably the end of March, you'll see the full release. And it will be a controlled release because there are 8,000 VS customers out there, and we don't want you all trying to do this at once and then calling support, 5 seconds later because you didn't do the OS update because you weren't keeping your software current before.
And I'm not there anymore, so why would you want to talk to the other guys?
Oh, yeah, there you go. Oh, ouch. And then, so there's a question too about VLAN designs and traffic prioritization, and this kind of comes back to almost like QoS routing and that sort of thing. How do you decide? And in a network, say you're in a smaller group, you're not cloud-based, so you have a network configuration. How do you decide who gets the highest priority within the facility? And then when you're routing coming in from the outside world?
So when you're doing VLAN QoS, you actually have to get kind of deep and into the nuts and bolts. You can do a QoS per port. So if the CEO really needs to get whatever he's getting to, stock exchanges, whatever, or the automation system needs to pull down ingest files from whatever external source, and it can't be interrupted. You want to make sure it's going to go there. You can do that per port, but typically when you're talking about QoS, you're actually digging down at the protocol level. So, is it a phone call, like, a SIP phone call, a soft phone back to the phone system? Is it an audio over IP device? Is it, a web conference, things like that? Media is usually what generates a QoS situation. And at that level, you have to be a little bit more picky of, getting to Google Drive is important, but are you going to go through and add every Google CDN to your QoS list? Probably not.
Right.
So you're going to start being a little bit more discriminatory as to what is considered QoS on that VLAN. We do it for our audio over IP network because there's a quality of service requirement because of packet delivery timing. That's why it exists. Same with a phone call. If you can hear the echo, that's a QoS problem.
Right.
Those are the kinds of situations you run into. So, and in your network diagram here, getting from, PC in the bottom right to the top left, both of the switches it traverses have to have the same matching QoS values. You can't just put it on the right switch expecting the left switch to respect it. It won't. You have to configure them both to respect the QoS values you've designated for that machine and that protocol.
And that comes back to the, I guess, law of unintended consequences. And you and I were discussing about VoIPs earlier and VoIP type phone systems, where a wired connection needs to have a higher QoS than a wireless, just by virtue of various things causing it, like lost packet causing it to disconnect type deal. And
it'll hang up on you.
And I've done webinars where you had to call in with the audio, and if I was on the VoIP because I'm trying to run everything from the computer, then some really snaky stuff can happen if I'm running Wi-Fi.
Right.
So
and Wi-Fi inherently is slower, but it has built-in congestion mitigation to allow for it to catch up.
Right.
Most wired systems just assume it's going that fast. That's why you have to do it at that level.
Yep. The other thing about partitioning is that partitioning doesn't necessarily mean that nobody can ever get to that section. Like if I say you're in this network, you're in this network, and never the twain shall meet, that's not necessarily the case, because there may be, and again, talking about upper level management or whatever, where somebody needs to cross subnets. So, you can make it as simple or as complicated as you want, I assume anyway. And I'm picking on Alex because, like I say, Aaron and Kevin, you guys do a lot of stuff cloud-based where it's just a matter of you get this, you don't get this. You can just assign each individual user. You don't really need to partition networks as much that way.
Yeah, and if you run it, and this comes back into the modern era, right? Not necessarily the olden days where you plug it into whatever you had from CompUSA, if you remember that place. It's your 3Com 100 meg hub, and just let it go, because I've run across those in 2022, still in use.
Whoa.
Jeff, your audio went crazy there.
It's still going crazy.
Still going crazy. Whoa.
Speaking
Change
of
your
QoS.
microphone and change it back, right?
Well, guys, I guess it's up to you and I. Let's carry it for the rest of the webinar.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at logical separation versus physical separation of your network, the vast majority of people, let's use audio over IP as the perfect example, because if you let an audio over IP device run rampant on your office network will not survive long. I've plugged an X node into a campus switch once and got a phone call from the state of Minnesota because I was running the entire state network at 97% utilization because they have multicast forwarding turned on throughout the state. So it went to the core in St. Paul and started replicating to every State Department office everywhere. Now, bad administration on their part, maybe. Their excuse was international students who bring home IPTV devices. And it's like, yeah, that's not how that works, but okay. But I have one X node took down a state network. I mean, that's what can happen. So we kind of do the physical, thou shalt not ever cross the paths. But there will be a time where those paths do need to cross at certain points. Let's use an STL on site, for example, if you're going to try and backhaul Livewire or WheatNet or Dante to your transmitter site. Well, that's without having a separate radio, that's a pinch point. So you will have to VLAN that trunk to go over across that line, and the switch on the other side has to logically separate them again. So, or if it's a V-wire or an L2 or an MPLS line, same thing. Has to be able to respect the VLAN tagging to get, your office data, your phone system data, and your Livewire data through that same pipe logically, and then put it back where it needs to go on the other side. Using Jeff's example here, he actually stole this screenshot from me on Facebook the other day. This is Wisconsin Public Radio's silent sets signal flow from our Pathfinder system. It's a little convoluted, but it shows how the separation and segregation has to happen at a ridiculously hard enterprise level. You got your core service here, you've got your feed out here, and that feed out may have a third service attached to it, and you got to follow it all the way through. Same with our administration system. Remember, it's like I'm the end user over here, but I need access to all this other stuff over here, so I've got to jump through the onion to get through it. And this is the topology that realistically you have to follow in large networks. Now, Kevin's might not be nearly as extravagant or heavy as this, and I know Aaron's is not, but he's going to have something very similar.
Thanks, Jeff.
Still messed up, Jeff.
I don't know, guys. I think Jeff sounds better.
I know, right?
Oh, so this is mine now, I guess. So it's my turn to pick up the baton.
Yep,
All right.
yes,
So
please, Aaron.
yeah. All right. Well, first I want to carry on a bit of what Alex just said, and this is a good point. He's right. My system is nowhere near as large, nor is it anywhere near as complicated as the stuff he's dealing with in Wisconsin. But it pays to know this stuff as much as you can. I mean, you can really get down the rabbit hole like Alex has. I mean, just look at the room behind him, and you can tell how far down the rabbit hole he is. But it pays to try and understand this stuff and plan ahead. This is one of the things I ran into, and this is why I ultimately created this Google Sheet. I have an extensive series of Google Sheets on this for all my networks. Was because I started out not paying a whole lot of attention to it because I figured, what the hell, I'll just make it up as I go. It's, these are tiny networks. It's not a big deal to it. Until one day that wasn't enough. And then I had to go back and redo it all from scratch. And let me tell you, that sucked. That was no fun. That was literally a month of every day spending several hours a day going back, planning it all, and then going and implementing everything, going out to a particular site and spending a day and a half reassigning every IP address, rerouting well, I do use some port forwarding. I'm trying to get away from it. Fixing all the VPN connections, fixing all the internal routing. I do a fair amount of internal routing to make sure that certain packets only go out certain ports and only come into certain ports. We do that a lot for our Telos iPort, actually. But it's actually a useful thing for all sorts of stuff, especially if you have like an enterprise grade WAN for your the important stuff, but then you have a backup for maybe just bare internet usage. Well, maybe the bare internet usage isn't going to cut it, so you want to make sure that stuff only goes out of the enterprise. Anyways, so this is a screen cap of a Google Doc that I access pretty much, not necessarily every day, but generally 2 to 3 times a week, because it's got all my IP addresses. I do keep at least a certain amount of usernames and passwords in there so I can't forget them all. It's got descriptions, it's got subdomains I've set up, it gives some information. Another thing I've actually been going back and doing more recently is making sure that I have the ISP's help desk number. If I've been lucky enough to get an email address from them, I'll put that in there. But I also put my PIN and my account number in there because I can't tell you how many times I've been out in the field and I don't have my laptop with me, and all I've got is this little guy, but I can get into Google Drive through this, And while I'm on the phone with some sort of help desk and say, okay, Cox, you know, what pin is this? Yeah, this pin is this one, and they won't help you otherwise.
Right. And one of
So
the things
yeah.
I notice on your sheet there is you actually have physical location as well as logical location.
Mhm.
You know, is there a rhyme or reason to your method there? Instead of, you know, spreadsheets do things well, they have multiple tabs, multiple sheets. Are you trying to do anything creative here, or just flat file because it's easy to look at a glance?
This is one sheet, or I guess I think the term is worksheets within a larger Google sheet. This is, I don't know if, did you take screen caps of the other, Jeff, or was it just this one? Just this one? Okay. So this one isn't, actually, this one is less pretty than most of the others. I have a worksheet for each site, and it's the leftmost columns are each and every possible IP address for that site. And then it just runs down, and whatever device is on that IP address, which A, shows me real quickly what IP addresses I've got handy. B, it makes it so much easier to standardize on, oh, I'm gonna screw it up. It's octets, right? Are
Yes.
the individual numbers? Yeah. So the last octet is, you know, like 10 is my transmitter, 14 is my backup transmitter, 50 is my 50 is my STL switcher, 40 is the primary STL. It's the same for each one of those, and then the previous octet varies from site to site, and there's a method to the madness about which number I assign to each. So
Sure.
that one definitely looks prettier. And yes, there are physical addresses, or at least usually in some kind of shorthand, there's a physical address for each
Sure.
one of those.
Aaron,
This
just so I know
one,
what I'm looking at here,
yeah,
these are internal addresses or external addresses?
mostly external.
That's
That's what I
why
was
they
going to
got
say,
blanked.
actually.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was thinking as much, but I didn't know if do you keep track of both internal and external addresses?
yeah, the first worksheet is this one. In that overall Google sheet, the first worksheet is this one. That's all the external IPs for all of my sites. And I keep that just because it was easier to put them in a separate document than trying to incorporate it for each one, each individual site on each individual worksheet. And you're right, Alex, this one it's not, like, I don't really make a whole lot of use of the sorting ability on this. It would probably screw things up, actually. But it's still an easier way of keeping track of everything in a spreadsheet form like this.
Sure.
And this is, you might notice that in the top center, it says last edit is made yesterday at 2:10 p.m. by Tech RIPR. That's a specific Google account I've set up. In theory, anyone can access it, but I don't give the password to anybody. It's just me. But I have it set up on the machines at each. I usually have a small form factor desktop or maybe a laptop at each one of my remote sites. And each one of those has a version of Chrome that's logged into that account, so I can pull it up very quickly and very easily at each one of my sites. And I also use that for, it has its own Google Drive so that I can upload manuals, firmware updates, various
Right.
kinds of software. You know, there's other Google Docs as well that I keep in there, usually signs that I might want to print out and hang at a particular
Sure.
location for whatever reason. It just keeps it easier to keep it all centralized and on the cloud.
Well, since Jeff's audio has gone sideways, they've designated me the MC for now.
Oh,
We were talking about this prior to the start, was that you have one of the better known or most accessible blogs that are out there written by engineers for engineers, and even down to the layman's term.
thank you.
You know, considering there's other resources out there like the BDR stuff and PubTech and RadioTech and listservs, those are usually, you know, hiding behind, you got to get into the email stuff. Yours is actually a website. Can you talk about a little bit more what, you know, your trials and tribulations? Because I know your networking is, you're beyond a beginner, but you're not quite at the advanced level yet. So you're learning your ways here.
Yeah, I'm not really a hacker. I call myself a fumbler more than a hacker. Yes. If anyone's curious, thepublicsradio.org, click on About on the left-hand side there, and then the menu that pops up, click Engineers Corner. This particular blog post kind of spells out a lot of what we've just been talking about, of how I approach my setup at each location. And again, like I said, the biggest thing I've learned in all of this is it's worth it to plan out as much as you can in advance and because you'll find yourself catching all kinds of little problems before you deploy. If you think about, okay, I'm going to apply this at this site, I'm going to run it all down. Okay, all right, now I have to apply the schema to this site over here.
Right.
Oh, that didn't work. Okay, well, I'll fix it. This. Go back, fix this. Now I have to apply it to this third site. Oh, that didn't work. All right, fix. And and eventually it got to the point where each time I'm coming up with a new site, there's not very much to fix because
Right.
I've made my system be fairly accommodating for everything. We already talked about the Google account. I mean, like I said, organization and logistics are the killer in all of this. That's more important than almost anything else because it helps so much.
Right.
Oh yeah, we talked about this just a little while ago. Yeah, like I said, when you don't have that code information handy with you and you're out in the field, it's a huge pain in the ass. So it's very good to keep that in there. I just started doing that a few months ago, and
Yep.
it has saved my bacon a few times. Do you have any more there, Jeff? Or
we're getting close to the top of the hour. As always, the four of us will always run over the top of that like nobody's business. So we're just going to keep going. If those of you have other appointments, be sure to check this out on the YouTube channel in a couple days when Ed posts it there. It will be available on the Nautel website as well under the webinars. But if you have to go, we understand. If you can stick around and beat the dead horse with us, by all means, hang out. So we'll go probably we'll try to get it done by 20 after, but I make no promises. So let's jump a little bit more here and get into the OSI stuff, which comes back to the security. Kevin, I wanted to kind of pick your brain on this level, since you're that intermediate. I'm way over here dealing with your old job and modernizing that, but you've got a university gig too, where you have to maintain multiple sites, you interact with university networks, and the importance of segregating your network from a logical perspective from transmitter sites and how that interoperates, and at what level do you protect them?
Yeah, so we've actually got, there's like a bunch of different layers to our particular network. We are a department of this university, and we're kind of unique in that the university handles all of the desktop support. So for instance, the computer I'm on right now is on the university network. That goes back to a central router. And then we've got our production IP space that we actually lease from the university. So they give us internal IP addresses with, I think we've got 256 VLANs up to that we can use. Right now we're using a total of 15 that we segment our traffic out, but everything's accessible from our network to the production network. So from my desk, I can see our production network, but you have to know those specific IPs. Like you're not just going to stumble into it. You have to know where you're going effectively. And then from there, we split out the transmitter sites. So our production network is extended out to our transmitter sites, and we've got Metro E connections. So we're doing everything at the layer 2. So our network's just extended out to the transmitter sites, but we only take specific VLANs out there. So we're not going to put our live wire traffic, all of it going to the transmitter sites, because, well, we did that once and it did not work out very well. You tend to hit above your throughput pretty quickly, and that'll take down your network. So yeah, we only allow, each site actually only does 2 VLANs. One is for the general traffic for that site. So the computers are up there, any of the devices, the remote controls, things like that. Those are on their own VLAN, and then there's a second VLAN that's high priority. Actually, one of our sites is 3. It carries the audio over IP traffic for our STL links, and it carries our ASI over IP for our TV STL as well. So we've segmented those out, and we have prioritized those not only on our network, but we had to prioritize that with CenturyLink as well. We had to get a high QoS because it needed the low latency to carry the ASI feed over it, because the ASI got wonky if you didn't have something set for real high quality. Which the good news was that also let us do live wire traffic as well, a limited amount of live wire traffic over Metro E connection as well. So we've got it pretty well segmented, and I've got a spreadsheet very similar to yours, Aaron, that breaks out our different VLANs and what's on our different VLANs, because we actually don't have DHCP enabled. We don't have DHCP on our production network. Everything we do, we have to hard program on our DHCP or on our production networks. So we manage all of those things, and we've got our own domain controllers that oversee all of that stuff. And then we basically just contain everything. We kind of divided up the network to physical spaces. So like our TV master control is one, our television production is another one, radio is another one, radio live wire we break out. So we kind of segment it based on physical locations in the building. And then the neat thing is we organize that by device. So what's neat about that is because we have redundant devices on different VLANs, so like remote controls of transmitter sites, those get specific like 12.3, 13.3, 14.3. So you don't have to necessarily remember what device is what. You just have to remember the first number based on that site. So like 9.3 is our remote control for one site. So it works out pretty easily and helps keep us organized.
Sure. Do you does the university require you for those remote facilities to maintain any other remote security because it is physically off-site?
Everything runs back through them. So ultimately it is an extension of our network. But if you're out there and you're getting on the internet, it runs back to through the university's firewall and back out there. So everything is done under the university's umbrella and under the university's security, and they take that pretty seriously.
Yep, a lot of them do. Eric Sace says you use one password to keep track of ISP, billing, tech contact info. It's not just for login and passwords, it's all relevant contact data, which brings up a good point. Like we use LastPass, which does the same thing. We can do contact information, passwords, so on and so forth. But that's a really good thing, but make sure you check with, take the advice of an MSP if you have one, like Aaron, using that type of technology, if it's right for you. In certain enterprises like the universities, it has to be vetted by campus IT if you're allowed to use it because it goes onto the university property, so on and so forth. Like I said, we use LastPass, but other places use like the Google Authenticator type of thing. Those are all really good suggestions. Our brains are only so big, right? We got to push something out to keep something else in there. And who wants to remember the guy's contact information from the ISDN days? Although many of us could probably rattle off his phone number, but he hasn't been there in 20 years. So with the layers of the OSI model, so you start getting into, like you said, layer 2, because you're being handed off physical. But when you get up to the application layer, now if Jeff will go one more slide, you get the interesting part of what is your network really doing, I believe was his next picture. Can't hear you, Jeff. There it is. All right. So this is Jeff's home network of stuff that is coming at him from the outside world. So if you look here, he's getting hit quite hard. 150,000 penetration attempts to his home network in a week. Most of it going to his corporate laptop, which is even funnier yet. So they know who you are, Jeff.
That's in 2 days, Alex.
So
see the date range there?
Yeah, exactly. The date range is something to pay attention. But you can see how many things are trying to scan or threat blocks. And it's doing a speed test for him just so. And this is a mesh Wi-Fi network in his own house, so he can share this kind of data. And obviously, I'll pull it off your cell phone, which makes it even more secure. But it's useful information to know what is out there and what you actually are protecting it from. This is Jeff's house. Not even an enterprise. This isn't a business target. This is just Joe Schmo on a cable modem. So keep that in mind, guys. If he's getting hit 150,000 times a week, and it's only Tuesday, imagine what's knocking on your door. And you probably are getting that metric from whatever device you have on the edge. You just probably haven't looked at it, or if your device can't look at that, go look at that. It puts it puts a very high numeric value on what that equipment is actually doing. So, and then you got the other side of the coin too. If Jeff will go to the next slide. It's not only important to know what's coming at you, it's also important to know the other way. What is your network doing to go out? Once he presses go.
Apparently it's not doing slide commands going out.
There it is.
Oh, there it is.
So this is my home network. I run Pi-hole at home. I also run it at KVSC, my college station here that I've worked at for a long time. We use more of an enterprise version of that at WPR, but this is a worthwhile endeavor. You know, this is your ad blocking, but like smart devices. How many of you've got the smart light bulbs, the switches, and things like that? Do you really know where it's going? Where did it come from? Did you get the cheaper version of the one you shouldn't have because it was $5 cheaper? Yeah, there's a reason it's $5 cheaper. But Pi-hole, this one, my network runs on a virtual machine on my routers. I have a ESXi machine sitting over in my rack that runs, you know, pfSense and Pi-hole and a couple other virtual machines for my amusement. You can run this on a regular Raspberry Pi just the same, and it's just a DNS server. So you would, you know, implement a DNS system. It can run as a DHCP server as well, so it can create that portion of it for you. One of the beauties of it is it works as a local DNS server. So for instance, at KVSC, I have kvsc.local as a domain. So remembering my Cisco switches that I have to maintain or the automation network, I put it in here as a static DNS entry because those are, like Kevin said, those are production machines. Their IP addresses never change. I know where they are, but instead of remembering 172.16.3.240, I type in pathfinder-01.kvsc.local. And that gets me to that machine because this is providing DNS to all of my clients just the same. And so you do have to do a little bit of work. You have to set this as your DNS server for it to look to. And that's why it uses a DHCP server as well, so it can hand itself out on your network. But it's a pretty cool little thing. As you can see, the total queries there, 85,000. That's coming from inside my network.
Yeah, I run Pi-hole as well.
9.4%.
I have my smart gadget set up on its own VLAN with Pi-hole basically blocking all outbound traffic. And like you said, you'd be astounded at how much that stuff wants to call home. And particularly in the middle of the night, it likes to do it in the night.
Yep.
That's not an accident.
Yeah, Jeff posted a Adafruit link there in the chat for anybody who's interested. There's a Pi-hole kit that Adafruit does sell. I believe, Aaron, you said you have one of those?
Yeah, I can't find the exact one that I bought off there, so this is a slightly different one that's, according to, unfortunately, it's out of stock at the moment, but that kit, that link is $40.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on, you got no excuse, guys.
Right.
And it's and if you go, one of the things I found, I mean, I know a little bit about Linux. I know a little bit about how to move around in a, you know, command line infrastructure. I know, you know, especially, you know, dealing with a GUI based Linux, you know, I've messed around a little bit, but I am by no means a Linux expert. And Adafruit was really good about spelling out, here's exactly what you type, how you type it, and here's how you do it. And I followed their directions. And in less than an hour, I had a Pi-hole set up on my home network. And my home browsing has never been better. I mean, it's ridiculous how much. I was just visiting a friend out of state, and she didn't have a Pi-hole on her Wi-Fi. And I was like, oh my God, what is all these ads and everything on my laptop? It's driving me crazy. And I forgot that's what it's like when you don't have one of these things on there. It's so much slower and so much more cluttered.
So the question that I'm sure a lot of people are asking is, why do we care about this, right? Mm-hmm. It's knowledge. You need to know your threat assessment level. You need to know what's coming at you and what you already have inside that's going out. So this is going to allow you as the network administrator, de facto network administrator, or even your MSP is probably going to recommend something similar, if not this directly, to assess your risk level. And that risk level nowadays is tied to an insurance policy. You know, a lot of them are asking at the corporate levels, what's our threat level internal and external, how much exposure do we have, and how exposed are we to the greater good, and seeing where that lands. And then they're putting a dollar amount on it should things go sideways quickly. You know, the ransomwares, the malware attacks, things that take you offline. This is where that data is needed. So it's ounce of prevention factor. I mean, like you said, $40 for the kit to make it do this. Yeah, okay. So the sales manager can't play the game with the ad. It's, you know, ad supported. Sorry. You know.
For what it's worth, Alex, I highly recommend Pi-holes at home, where, you know, it's just a couple people using it, and it's mostly for your own you know, improved browser experience, let us say. And it really is night and day. I can't emphasize that enough.
Right, but it's also a
more,
protection. I'm not afraid to say, let's put it in small businesses that are non-enterprise level, where this kind of thing exists in like a Fortinet or a Palo Alto, you know, $100,000 firewall systems and intrusion prevention systems. If you're not that level and your MSP doesn't have an option for that, a Pi-hole in like a remote studio facility to do certain tasks and objects, perfectly fine to put that into businesses, because it's protecting you from inside out just the same. You know, it'll catch the fact that it's going to a domain name in Korea or Russia and put it right into the bit bucket. You know, it could just save you. You never know. For $40, is that worth the experiment to find out? Test it out. Put a couple of, you can actually say, here, we're going to try this on a couple of key machines, like let's put it on the sales corral and see what it does. You know, if they start complaining that things stop working, okay, we can take it out, but you didn't impact anything. Not that hard to do.
Yeah, just be prepared to whitelist a lot of things, especially in the first few weeks when you're using it. I found there were a whole bunch of things that it was blocking, like access to our own station's website. Like half our website stopped working. I was like, oh, that's not good.
Right. There are certain things that are there. Let's see here. Joseph Niffen, any recommendations to DIY firewall router open source wise? Yes, there are a lot of them out there, but there are only a couple popular ones. pfSense is one, and then I personally use OpenSense, which is a little bit different. It's got a different open source community behind it instead of the paid for module factor. And it has a little bit different hardware compatibility list, but they are fundamentally very similar. Firewall and intrusion prevention. I can pay a service for 0-day intrusion prevention on either of them if I wanted to. But then there's like the OpenWRT stuff, if you have like an old Linksys that you want to try with. And these are experiments at home. I know guys out there that do try to run like pfSense and stuff in the corporate environment. Unless you have the time to deal with it, don't do that. You know, pay for the commercial, you know, pay for a FortiGate, pay for the Cisco's, pay for the Palo Altos. Just go there instead.
You'll thank us.
You'll thank us later, yes. When you become the support, you turn into literally you have no other choice but to do that part that day. VPN versus VNC, what are they and what are the differences? Well, they're very different. VPN is a private network. VNC is just a remote desktop that you may want to put through a VPN. The big no-no that everybody gets away with now is I'm sure if you do a port scan like Jeff's favorite Shodan thing, I believe it can scan for VNC because it's a common port, 5800 and 5900. So if you poke those through the firewall, chances are someone can see you and get access right to a Windows desktop so that you think it's secure. So don't do that. Physical security, when we talk about air gaps, exactly what we've already discussed. You know, keep them separate. In certain instances, that may be the only recourse, like audio over IP for the non-technically or non-IT inclined, is just don't let them touch. You know, put 2 network cards in every machine that need to access both networks. So that would be a physical security thing too, because they are physically separate. You know, physical security of if I can get through the front door, all bets are off. If I, like we were talking about the scan station, people, oh, it's not working. Oh, because Wi-Fi is turned off, because that's going to be their instant thing, right? Those are the kinds of things. If they have physical access, you've lost control. So if you air gap something, make sure you're air gapping it more than just technically. Social interaction as well. Educate your receptionists on things. Quiz them, call them, have your kids call them, ask them for questions. See how well your receptionist does. Shane Tobin was saying that he's been watching a lot of the classic movies lately, like Hackers. Well, one of the first scenes in that movie is calling the receptionist at the desk saying, hey, I've got to get this file over here. Can you give me the phone number to your modem? Now, granted, 1995, and a modem is not a thing today, but what is a thing is, hey, we've got this invoice we're trying to get to you. Can you give me an FTP or a drop site or an email address, something internal and personal that they can get to? Social engineering is a huge problem right now, so make sure your people are educated on it. Kevin's nodding his head. Do you have any of those kind of honeypot things? I know that Nautel used to do a lot of that.
No, I was just going to say that's kind of the way that security's gone these days, because firewalls have become standard, because people have gotten more versed and the hardware is caught up, so that intrusion is not nearly as prevalent as it used to be. Now it's just more, they've figured out it's easier to just send somebody an invoice that looks like it's legit, or some kind of email or some kind of social engineering. That's how they're getting into your network. That's how ransomware gets into your network, as opposed to just brute forcing their way into your network, because that's just not worth it anymore. There's far easier ways to get it done.
Right. And the other things that are out there, like you said, the two-factor, the multi-factor, but the biggest thing is, I believe that right now, the greatest threat is actually human to human. I gave you this thumb drive. Do you trust it? I'm asking you for personal information. Those things on Facebook, what was the favorite song, #1 song on your birthday? What was your first pet's name? Stop answering those. It's just data mining and holding it off back and forth just to figure out more and more about you, and it goes into a giant database, and I'll pay $20 on the black web to pick it off. It's not that hard, guys. Stop giving it. It sounds like it's fun on the front page, and even radio stations are guilty of even starting these trends. Stop doing it. It's not a thing. It's data mining, and you're just helping them out. So with that being said, we're 20 minutes over, like I said. Kevin, Aaron, and even Jeff, thanks for being here. And
only 20, that's a new record for
on
us.
VPNs.
Alex, thanks for jumping in. That was great.
Yep. So thank you guys, and we'll see you here next week for the next one on VPNs with the same cast of characters. Thanks now, and have a good night.